Welcome to another episode of the Wealthy Podcast. I'm your host, Shauna Nyros, and today we're talking with someone who is really special to me, Carly Gunn. Carly is a clinician we've worked with for years in acute mental health care at the hospital KGH, but today we are going to be talking to Carly about her journey with breast cancer. And as many of you know, I also have a journey with breast cancer. So Carly and I share insights and revelations that we learned along our journeys, as well as a little bit of what you can expect if you are newly diagnosed. And I'm really, really excited about this conversation. Carly's and my path have crossed many times over the years. We first met in yoga, downward dogging, at Orange many years ago. And then our paths have crossed again at Kelowna General Hospital. Because Carly is a nurse, and she's also, I learned this morning, she's also formerly the team lead in the adolescent psychiatric unit at KGH, but she's got a new role. So I'm just going to throw it over to you so that you can share with what that is.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So yes, I have been, I've been working for Interior Health for quite some time. I think it was 2005. I started with them. I was formerly the adolescent psychiatry team lead for quite a few number of years. Also, I had worked on that floor as a nurse for a long time. So I left that unit and decided to branch into the community, which is, a new aspect of interior health that I had never worked in before. And so now I'm lucky enough to have been part of the startup of the Early Psychosis Intervention Program, which is essentially a program for clients who are experiencing psychosis or a break from reality for the first time. So they are individuals who are between the ages of 18 and 30, sometimes even higher than that, as we found out. Where they may be diagnosed eventually with diseases like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And then I have two other teams as well. One is the Youth Intensive Case Management Team, so youth that are struggling with substance use and homelessness and other aspects of their lives that make it very difficult to engage with traditional services. And Teo, which is a team that is just a singular entity, a lovely female that I work with. She helps youth age out of care, so transition from the ministry into adulthood.
Amazing work. And I hope that we can bring you back on the podcast, on the Wealthy Podcast in the future, because if any of our listeners have an interest in youth mental health and some of the programs that we have in community, you are definitely the person to talk to.
No, there's so many programs out there, so much great work going on.
Yeah. And, for the most part, I know for us on this podcast, we're very curious about, upstream solutions to help keep folks out of the hospital. And really, that's what you're
being proactive. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Totally hope to have you back. But that's not why you're here today. No. So Carly and I share more than just a love for downward facing dog and advancing healthcare in our community. Because, excuse me, Carly and I both have lived experience with breast cancer.
Mm-hmm. Survivors,
mm-hmm. Yes. So I'm just going to start by kind of putting some context around this. The Canadian Cancer Society estimates that in 2024, 30,500 Canadian women will be diagnosed with breast cancer.
No, that's a large number.
Yeah, staggering. It is the most common cancer among Canadian women and the second leading cause of death. On average, 84 Canadian women will be diagnosed every single day. So the good news is the death rate peaked in 1986 and has been declining ever since. But the not so good news is that 1 in 8 Canadian women will develop breast cancer in their lifetime. And today, you're going to hear from 2 of us. So, Carly, welcome. And thank you for being so brave and sharing about a very personal story in your life. We're going to start with kind of an opening tradition that we have on the podcast, which is all of us have had experience with healthcare throughout our lives. I'm curious for you, can you recall and share with us kind of like the first moment when healthcare significantly affected your life or that of someone close to you? When maybe you really started to understand why being healthy is so vital?
Well, I think the first one, if I've been thinking about the biggest impact in my life, was determining what I wanted to do with my career.
Mm-hmm.
So I probably was about 19 years old. I was traveling around Australia, and at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to find myself and, trying not to, drink all my money away while, just being like a vagabond out in Australia. And I thought, what do I really want to do? What do I love? What is going to fill my cup up for, a very long time? And so I decided that I was going to be a paramedic. I'm gonna go back to Canada. I'm going to, buckle down, and I'm going to become a paramedic. But then, one of the experiences while I was over there was, there was a girl that I was traveling with, and she had her first break of schizophrenia while we were traveling in Australia. And, we started to become aware of all these services that were out there. I knew that I was passionate about mental health. I had, lost a friend of mine to suicide when I was about 14. And so I decided, what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do buckle down, do a 4-year nursing program, stay at home. And so that's what I did. I came back and, did my BSN here. And it seemed like such a long time. It was, 4 years back then was just, it felt like, an entire lifetime. And then I would say the second time where it became really imperative to become close with, the healthcare system was I was struggling with fertility. And, I never thought that would be another journey that I would go down because my husband and I, we really wanted to have a baby, and it just, it wasn't happening. And there were all these barriers in place. And so engaging with the healthcare system in that regard, both, in hospital and then, in the community, and then back in the hospital to deliver my baby because it all worked out. And so, and obviously with my career as well.
And that's such a beautiful segue into this conversation because, of course, you do have your beautiful daughter, Vivian.
Yeah, 8 now.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess you could say that Vivian may have saved your life. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about how you discovered that you had cancer?
Oh, I like it how you put it that way. Yeah, so I was 38 years old. I was in probably the best shape of my life because I had this baby that I had wanted for so long. I just felt so excited about it. Nothing was going to stop me. I was loving motherhood, and I was breastfeeding. And so in those moments, most moms can contest. If you're breastfeeding your baby, it's usually you're in a quiet spot and you're sitting there in a chair. And so I had her on the one breast, and then I just felt something roll on my finger on the one side. And, I just remember suddenly just getting this palpitation because I just knew immediately that that was not my breast tissue. And so I had all these thoughts. I could feel my heart just racing even just thinking about what that moment was like.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I moved her over to the other breast, and I really started to palpate myself, feel it roll. And I remember when I was an adolescent, there was this commercial on, and it was it's like an orange seed. When you feel it, it'll be like this orange seed that'll roll against your finger. And it was just like that, And so I thought, okay, is my life going to change right now? What will this be like? I'm good, right? I'm totally good. And so, I decided to make this appointment. So I went to my GP, I said, I think there's something there. They checked it out. And I think because, statistically, things looked really like they were in my favor. I'm 38, no history of breast cancer. healthiest, time of my life. I'm active. There's just so many things that, made it seem like I wouldn't be someone who would have it. But then I went back home after, kind of having conversations and, people saying, maybe, this is, because you're breastfeeding, this probably isn't anything. And I just had this feeling, how do you know unless you look at it under a microscope?
So at that point, they weren't really concerned and
I just didn't really
considering,
fit the maybe the box of what like a conventional person might. Like, I think there weren't enough warning signs that, would be anything to be worried about, because maybe it was a blocked duct, from breastfeeding, or maybe, it would just be something that my body would absorb over time, or I'm not really sure. But then I did get that biopsy. And, maybe later in this conversation, we can talk about sort of these weird, like, spiritual moments that I had around that time that sort of like made me go back, this like internal dialogue I was having with myself. But I did get that biopsy. I was sitting at home. My husband was working up north, and I was just playing with Vivian on the floor. And, when no news is good news from the GP.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I answer it, and it's, we really would like you to come in person and come and talk to us. And right away, I can just feel it just rising in my throat. And because Blake was up north, I called my friend, and she came over, and I decided to do the long walk, from my house, because I knew that this was going to be the last time that, I would be, someone who didn't have that mortality bubble burst, for sure. And sure enough, when I got there, she said, you have breast cancer, and, that it's kind of like a switch goes off in your mind, and you go into this very different mode of, there's 1,000 different thoughts going on. Does this mean I'm going to die? Does this mean, I wasn't even thinking about the vanity side of things yet. That came.
Later,
those were other things that, really came, where I think I was still so naive about what that really meant that I couldn't have really grasped that. Just that you have cancer. And I think they do this strategically, is that they only kind of tell you a little bit. And in that moment, maybe that's wise, like, you have cancer, sit with that for a bit. It's breast cancer. We don't know exactly what kind it is yet. We don't know really what that means. But you have it. So now go home. And then I had to walk home. And then I had to talk to my family about it. And who was going to call me next? And it was just, after that, it's just a roller coaster of,
you just follow
the next steps,
the directions that you're given. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I had heard, but until I experienced it myself. Also, by the way, you mentioned the orange seed. For those women that are listening that are very curious about what breast cancer might feel like, I'd never heard the orange seed thing. I didn't see that commercial, but
okay.
Mine felt like a chocolate chip.
Okay.
So really similar.
Yeah. Just something that you could move almost.
Yeah, but it was
feel it.
Yeah, it was hard.
Yeah,
it was different than, as women, we become familiar with the variability in our breasts, right? And I had also breastfed 2 children, and I had had a Mirena, which is an IUD, inserted 8 or 9 months prior to my discovering this lump in my breast. And so like you, when I went to the doctor at age 44 with no history and super healthy and, didn't eat all the bacon and,
Right.
that person.
Yes.
She was like, oh yeah, it's probably nothing. Like, it's probably just a thickening from, maybe the Mirena or, just changes in your hormones in your 40s, blah, blah, blah. So I do want to come back to that conversation around listening to that inner voice inside.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Because it's really easy to just put all of our faith and trust in our incredibly awesome care providers.
Mm-hmm. And I really did have wonderful care providers.
Me too. I have nothing but great things to say about the care I received. But I feel you and I hear you on that aspect of like, there's something in you that knows, and we have to listen. So we'll come back to that.
Yes.
Totally. But yeah, that feeling of like, when you get the news, I didn't realize they don't know anything yet other than...
that's when it really like hit home for me. I think I had got, I had had a conversation with Dr. Ed Hardy, who ended up, being a huge part of this journey for me. And my very good friend, Kim Bodner, who was at the time working with Vernon Cancer Care. So, we have this conversation and, just kind of in the background, Ed says, oh yeah, you're going to need chemo. And I just was like, and it was almost like, even though like I know what cancer is, right? And I know like I had, for some reason, did not think that that was going to be part of that story. And suddenly I felt like I couldn't get deeper into my couch. Like I was like, oh my God. And I couldn't escape it. It was like this heavy, horrible, like just, like so intense feeling of, I have to face this and I really don't want to. And, you revert back to like almost being like, oh, I need my mom. Or, like, how do I, like, this is like heavy stuff. Like, how do you navigate this kind of like destruction on your, your ego, your mortality? Like, it really is like, I felt like someone just like popped that mortality bubble for me. And so then, I thought, is my hair going to fall out? And that was like and he's like, yes. And I'm like, my eyebrows? And he's like, yep. It was just telling me like it was. And I think in a way, I wasn't quite ready to hear all those things yet, because then I just shut right down. And I remember saying to my friend Kim, like, I think you should leave. It was just so not like me at all. But I was like, oh, I need to like process this and I need to, and she was so respectful. She was like, okay, like, you're okay though. And because my husband was still up north working, I was still alone and I was in my baby sleeping and and it was just so much. I mean, like, it's so hard to comprehend all of those things and, what that means for your health and your vanity and, just, you start to have a lot more thoughts.
And it's the thoughts too, like in that early stage, I felt like we can kind of get there. Like once you're in it. But on those early stages when all you have is your thoughts and your fears, and like you being a young mom, I was the same. I was terrified of what chemo might do to my appearance.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? And in my particular case, we can talk about the different pathology of our cancers and why you did need to have chemo and why I didn't. But yeah, it's like in on top of the mortality bubble bursting, it's all of these things around your identity as a woman and what is beautiful and, hey, something you just take for granted, like eyebrows and hair, like all of a sudden
the function of those things.
Yeah.
I remember when my eyelashes all fell out and suddenly I was like, why can't I get the dust out of my eyes? Like that's what they're there for.
Exactly.
Or the hairs in my nose. I would just like dribble snot down my face. And I was like, oh, because I have no hairs in my nose anymore to stop that.
Yeah.
And, the funny stuff was I remember like getting out of the tub one day and being like, I have no armpit hair to shave. That's amazing. What a perk, right?
So it's also funny. I love how you mentioned that, how you look for little wins.
The win, yay. I never have to shave my legs, for the next 19 weeks.
Woo, Exactly. Yeah. And this diagnosis happened in when? When was it?
2017.
2017.
Yeah. So I found out really quick the type, which actually in my case seemed even more scary because of
share.
course it's not the run of the mill type of, what every woman gets, breast cancer is, the kind of the idea that I had about it. But so I had a fairly rare form called triple negative breast cancer. And the statistics, at the time, because you can't help but Google, doctor the crap out of it, were pretty daunting. Like I was pretty nervous at the beginning because essentially it said that because I caught it in stage 1, it was huge that I caught it at stage 1. Like mine was definitely
your
a killer.
Overall prognosis.
Yeah, my overall prognosis for sure. That it was something that based on my race, based on my health, based on even my demographics of where I live, that I probably shouldn't have this kind. That it was just odd that I would have this, triple negative, and that it was imperative that I stop breastfeeding, that I, get in and get this dealt with right now. So surgery wasn't even important. They were just like, we need to make sure that this isn't anywhere else in your body, because if it is, you're in big trouble.
Mm-hmm. And how old was Vivian?
So she was 22 months.
22 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that was really hard. Because I was, well, as a mom, it's like, breast is best and do it for as long as you can. And, just try to be, so available to your baby, your toddler. And suddenly I had this, distraction. And it just felt like I was being cheated, out of this amazing time with her, with this new horrible thing I had to focus on. But I had to cold turkey breastfeeding. And I remember that night coming home and just having to, not breastfeed.
Yeah.
And how she felt about that.
And so these are just all these things. I'm sorry. These are just the things that are on the periphery of the diagnosis around and at that point you don't know much other than this is cancer and we got to deal with it quickly. But then having to also life, and
she doesn't stop needing me.
But the, for any woman that has had the gift of being able to breastfeed a child, weaning is...
It's also a huge process.
It's a process.
Yeah. And I didn't have a backup plan for that.
It's an emotional process, right? So my heart just breaks for you in that period because I know what it felt like to just be holding all of the cancer stuff. And I can't imagine having to also, grieve that.
Yeah. Yeah. She didn't really understand. No.
Yeah. So then what? So it's surgery and we got to figure out what we're dealing with here.
Yeah. Well, in my case, it was chemo first. And so,
okay.
Yeah. So I ended up having, Dr. Ed Hardy, who became the person who was, my doctor for that part of it. Because I don't know if people know this, but it's almost kind of broken up into 3 parts for most individuals, not all. Like yourself, not all, right? But it was, chemotherapy, surgical interventions, and then radiation, and then sort of, your follow-up after that. So for me, it went in that order. I went chemotherapy, and it was about, finding the right cocktail. And, I remember those little things that they don't tell you about, what it's like to have your first IV start, where that you feel incredibly healthy in this moment, right? Like I felt amazing, the best shape of my life. And yet I have to wrap my head around taking a medicine that will make me feel sicker than I have ever felt in my life. And that's actually a treatment. That's actually a medicine, right? That works because it worked for me, right? But that it's bright red, and so I'm staring at this IV in my arm and it's this medication, it's red. And I'm just and so what I associate, whatever comes to mind when you think
and don't
red
they
is
call it the red devil or something?
I don't know. I don't remember hearing that.
Oh, I think
that would have made it worse for me if someone had said that.
I'm sorry
sure.
if that's not what it's called, but I think I've heard that. Yeah,
I don't know.
Because it's so shockingly red.
It's so shockingly red. And I just remember thinking, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm just going to, and it was fine. And I was like, oh, Because another thing they don't tell you is that it's not like you feel sick like right away. Like I was able to do like the things I was able to do. It was more the psychological aspects of like what was happening, that I went off, work. And then, now I have more time with my thoughts, right? I have more time to think about like, my impending death and how, my husband's going to remarry and someone else is going to be, raising Vivian, and will the stepmother be, as good as I am? I mean, all these things, right? You just like stay up all night long, just, ruminating these thoughts. But then having to go in for these treatments. And then, I have this really good friend. I don't think she'll mind if I mention her name, but her name is Aiden. And she, was my person to talk to, because she went through chemo, she went through cancer long before I ever thought I would have cancer. And she said, you really need to shave your head. And I had long blonde hair, like down the middle of my back.
Yeah,
right?
I remember.
And I was like, oh, well, like, can't I, it won't happen right away. And she said, well, that's another big misconception, is that it all falls out at once. She's like, it doesn't. She's like, you get this medicine. And then, she said, for me, I left it too long and it started to come out in like these big clumps. So I decided to like, I'm the boss of my vanity. I'm the boss of my hair. So we had like a party at my house and shaved my head with all my girlfriends. And my husband shaved his head. It was like very emotional, as you can imagine, but also like funny in a way, because, suddenly then I'm looking at myself in the mirror with this shaved nog, and, and I realized like my head's like quite beautiful shaved. And I was like, oh, I should really like that. I could put some big earrings on. Yeah.
What was it? I remember you being very brave at that time and sharing on social media the beautiful photos that were taken as you shaved your head, and Blake did. And I thought, wow, like, and you did look beautiful.
No.
Yeah.
It was my friend Krista Evans. She is an amazing photographer, and she took
I know. I know Krista. She's awesome.
And did those photos for me, just because, it is a bit of a journey. And even though it's like those peaks and valleys in that journey, I did want to be able to look back on it one day and say, like I did that, like I.
One of the, I love what you said about kind of taking agency in that process. I think sometimes, a lot of the time on that cancer journey, there's a lot of things that are outside of your control. Like you literally just have to do what you're told. And a lot of the times not really knowing why or what's next, right? And Brene Brown talks about in one of her books this idea of having agency in the story, right? And how important that is. And I love what you just said about you making the decision about how that was going to go down.
Yeah, that I get to choose, and, that I'm going to make it into something that's, not about me being in the shower and, my hair coming out in big clumps, and, that I
like
would
the
do it.
tragedy of it. Yeah. It could be a triumph.
And I also liked what you said about how like it's so wrapped up in the way we see each other. How much money we put into our hair every month. The latest trends of like, the large eyelashes and the, like we spend a lot of money on our own vanity, right? And so, how do people see me if it's, not for certain things, right? They were now seeing me as someone who, might be sick, but it wasn't always like that. Like I remember I had a trip booked, and so I was told that because my immune system wasn't so bad, I could still take that trip. So I went to Mexico with my family, and I've got, no hair. By this point, every hair follicle has fallen out. So it's like shiny, right? Like there's the difference between like the buzz cut and the shiny head. And so I had the shiny head, but I still look healthy, quite healthy. And I hadn't lost all the weight yet, which, is another thing we can talk about. Like I really, really thin. And this, this gay couple came up to me in the pool, and they said, we just got to ask, did you shave your head for your triathlon? that you were doing.
Oh my God.
Because, that must be why you have a shaped head, not because you have cancer, because, healthy people, don't get cancer, right? Like healthy people don't look physically like you, right? And I just thought that was so interesting. I said, oh no, unfortunately, it's not that glamorous. I have cancer. And they were like, what? And I think a lot of people, especially my friends, it was really eye-opening for them. Like, a lot of them had never known somebody who had cancer. So I might, maybe not necessarily the first, but definitely not the last, unfortunately. And
totally. Yeah. And I can completely relate to what you're saying about young, healthy women don't get cancer, right? There's this perception, even though we know they do, it's always shocking.
Not that young, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Like little would you know that, this person who has cancer who's in your yoga class, like that it's going to be you.
I
right?
didn't know that.
You didn't know that.
That was
time
2 years before it was me. And even I remember, I didn't have chemo, so I could move through life and nobody knew, which was also a really weird situation.
And not that I would
trade it. Yeah. Not that I would trade it. And I just feel like the lived experiences that we've had, it's so interesting because like you said, breast cancer is not like one size fits all. Like as you had triple negative, I had lobular. Both of those are actually not your number one garden varietal of breast cancer. Yeah. So it was a very weird experience for me having cancer, going through surgery, going through treatment, and like walking around and being like, no one knows like that I'm holding all of this. It was just such a strange, I don't know, mind bubble.
Yeah. Yeah. I had to wrap my head around.
I'm not allowed to swear, but
no,
you know what I'm saying? It was a mind, yeah. But I can't imagine like what it must have been like for you. Let's talk a little bit about what happened to you physically as you progressed through treatment.
Yeah. So the first couple weeks of chemo, you're just kind of taking this treatment. You might feel off, like it's just a bit of an unusual feeling, a little spinny maybe, weak. But it wasn't really until like the sort of third round where, it was really doing its job. Essentially it was,
which is like
chemo really kills
killing all the cells.
All my cells.
Yeah.
And, I prided myself on someone who didn't have to, seek a lot of outside support with a toddler, I still had that, I was lucky enough to have her as this like blissful distraction, like I was still going out for all the walks and, I was her mom and I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself really, because I was so busy. And I remember one time just like climbing out of bed and I just sort of like fell on the floor and I called my mom and I just said, I can't do this today. You're going to have to come over, because I just felt like so weak. And I was used to being like this like strong, powerful person. And suddenly I was just so weak. I literally couldn't get off my floor and I couldn't keep food down. I couldn't, I couldn't eat. I had sores all inside my nose and my mouth, just like really like heavy, painful stuff. And, my fingers were going numb, my toes were going numb. And so it wasn't really until the end that all that stuff started to happen for me, like neuropathy. And I remember one time like holding, like even now, like holding my mug and suddenly I just, my hand just would like let go my mug. And I was like, whoa, like what's up with that? And, stuff like that. But I guess that kind of leads into like how do you manage those things, right? Like those moments where you can't eat. And so I went down to, I think it was like, I'm 5'11", I went down to 130 pounds. So I was really very thin and I started to look very like white and, because I essentially was, killing off all those healthy aspects of myself. And I knew it wouldn't be like that forever. My friends have told me when you stop it, it really does, your body is just this amazing thing that rejuvenates, right? But in those moments, it was really hard. So, my friend had said, why don't you try, because I couldn't eat, why don't you try like some cannabis, right? Cannabis was like this new up and coming thing that BC was doing. Like, why don't you give it a try? And I'm like, well, I've never, like, it was never
like
really
to help your appetite.
Yeah, help my appetite. But it honestly wasn't really my jam,
right,
in like my younger years or whatever. And I didn't like the idea of actually like smoking something. Nor did I think, like, I thought it would make my gag reflex and my, getting sick worse. And so I went and I saw someone in a shop and they said, well, try this. And I remember like, my husband and I being like, and it was actually like cannabis suppositories, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to like literally like put cannabis in my bum. Like, okay, that's weird. That's super weird, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll try it. And, this kind of leads into like some funny moments. But so I put Vivian to bed and I'm like, I'm going to like try to incorporate this new thing into my life, right? And so I use one of those suppositories and I'm like, okay, doing my thing. And I'm like folding laundry and I'm getting like baked on the floor, essentially. Like, and I'm just like, la la, like folding the laundry. And then I like by myself farted. Okay. My husband comes in and he says, are you smoking dope in here? And I died. I was so high. I fell on the floor. I was laughing. He was crying. He was laughing so hard. And I was just like, this is my life right now. I have no hair. I am using cannabis suppositories, laying on the floor.
Toots smell like pot.
Yeah. And you gotta like look for those light moments too, where you're like, as part of the journey, like there are some funny things that can happen that go along with the all heavy, right?
Like dying in here, by the way. It's just that.
Well, it makes you don't ever think about like who would have thought, right? But yeah.
Well, okay, they should put a warning on the cannabis suppository.
Still smells like pot.
Did it help though? Did you get the munchies?
Yeah, it helped. Yeah, it helped. I didn't really stick with it for long because anxiety is another thing that people don't always talk about it, and actually made it a little bit worse for me.
Mm-hmm.
The anxiety side of things where, I can turn off my brain and, stuff like that. But then into the next aspect of it, which was like the surgery part of it, was actually, for me, the easiest part. I mean, it was just, oh, I'm so glad I'm getting this thing out of me. I could not wait to not lay there and feel it, anymore. Like, cut it out, let's go. And even though the chemo had really shrunk it down to like literally the size of like a pinky nail, I just wanted it out of me, like right now. And everyone at the hospital was so lovely. I ended up knowing the anesthesiologist by fluke. And so I just felt like this, eerie sense of calm,
relief.
Like, yeah. Getting in there, getting it done, even though there was a chance, they were going to take some of my lymph nodes too, that it, could still maybe have been bad news, but it wasn't. They were able to get it all, and just the relief I felt about that. How did you feel in that?
Same. Yeah.
Same? Like just that relief, hey?
Yeah, I didn't have, as I said, so, my varietal of breast cancer was invasive lobular carcinoma. So yours was triple negative. So basically, the distinction with mine was the hormone profile, right? So my cancer was actually fed by hormones. Yours wasn't, right? So for me, when you have this profile, which is progesterone, estrogen positive, and HER2, which is a protein. I'm not going to get into all the science of it because I'll totally mess it up. But it's like a protein marker. When that is, so if you have the two hormone profiles are positive and then the HER2 protein is negative, you qualify for DNA screening or not a genetic screening, but a DNA screening. So that can tell you what your chances of recurrence will be. And the potential impact of chemo on that. It's only reserved for women, people, because men do get breast cancer as well, that have this hormone positive, HER2 negative. And in your case, everything was negative. And so you wouldn't have had the Oncotype test, right? So yeah, I had the test, and my test indicated that the benefit of chemo was very limited, and that my chances of recurrence were fairly low as it was because of the fact that it was found early. And so, lucky me, I could progress with surgery and radiation therapy, which I was actually very grateful for. It was my choice because I could have chosen to have chemo, and my medical oncologist went through sort of like what the risk benefit analysis of that looked like, and they don't tell you what to do,
No.
So I had
There's
to choose.
always choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether you're ready for it or not.
Yeah.
There's always choice. And, do I say yes? Do I say no? Should I say no?
Well, and
I don't know.
Yeah. And also the biggest thing that my medical oncologist, the advice she gave me is, she's like, when you're making this decision, just think about it in terms, will you ever regret not doing it? Right? And I thought that was a really great piece of advice, because I knew if I made the decision not to have chemo, that I was going to have to let it be, that I'm going to have to, that's it. I made the choice and move on. So yeah, then surgery was, I felt the same. I was just like, all right, let's go.
Let's get this done.
And the surgeons here at KGH are amazing. You can't even tell that I had surgery. They did an amazing job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my scar's actually very small.
Yeah, mine too. Very small, very small.
And then kind of hidden.
Yep.
On the side.
Yeah. So, I think we were both lucky in that sense that we had what you call a partial mastectomy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so,
or lumpectomy is kind of what they said to me back then. But.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk a little bit, I'm going to move away from treatment and talk a little bit about how important it was for you. What did support look like? How important was that as you kind of navigated this whole thing?
Yeah. Yeah, support and education and knowing where to get the right information was huge. So, the peer support, so friends.
Yeah.
That was really big. Some people felt really uncomfortable with, being like,
did you find
how do
that?
they support me?
Yeah.
Some people it was like radio silence all of a sudden. And, I tried not to take that personally, because I think people sometimes don't know how to navigate heavy conversations. And that's just maybe who certain people are. And then other people really came out of the woodwork, like some people that I wasn't expecting to really kind of be in my emotional arsenal, surprised me. And, that really reinforced, friendships and family is important, and saying yes to help was difficult for me, I know people say, it takes a village and, all that. But, I really like to do things on my own. So it was good for, people to step in and to help me. And, some of my friends got together and they kind of did help Carly buy a cool wig type event. And I remember doing that event, I think it was at Third Space. And, I had purchased this long wig, which I found out later was way too hot and heavy. And, I should have just gone with the short one. But, I took off my wig and got a picture with my bald male friends. And that was really
awesome.
Funny,
Yeah.
And that was cool. But the help from the education that you get from people like the nurses and my surgeon, and being able to ask all the hard questions. There was a spiritual side of things too for me. Some spiritual stuff kind of happened to me around the time that I wasn't expecting, because that wasn't a forefront of my life at the time when I got sick. And so talking to people about that side of things was important, and church has become a little bit more a part of my life since becoming sick for different reasons. And then, my work colleagues too, like I saw a job come open on the APU, and I was off. Like I was, I had my wig, and I thought, if I don't go and interview with this job, so I just slapped on my wig and went for it and just thought, I'll just go for it. And, they were like, we would love for you to come and, and be the team leader of the APU when you're ready.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And so then when I came back, that was where I came back to, was to the APU.
And how long were you off?
Ooh, I don't think too long. I could have taken longer. In fact, people said I should have taken longer, but everyone has their own coping strategies for stress. And mine was, if I could get back into my normal life again, then, everything would be fine. Right. And so I think it was 9 months I was off in total. The radiation side of things was the hardest, because I was like, hey, let's just get her done. This preventative, I wanted to get back to my life and have that be totally done. I don't think I went back to work too quickly. Everyone was so supportive when I came back, but it was the emotional stuff that came later on that I wasn't expecting, when it was all said and done and I was on the other side. That I was a different person, and I really grieved that person that I was before I got sick.
Yes, I can totally relate. I went back to work after 4 months, and I was ready. Like you, probably work is really fulfilling for me, and provided a lovely and necessary distraction from always thinking about cancer. And I'm so lucky to have, again, like you, an amazing team to come back to, and so much support there. I also was unprepared for the emotional trauma of having to reconcile what just happened, because it happened so fast. Hey,
I was quite angry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was just sort of, mad at the universe, because, why had this happened to me? And, what I know now is, why not me?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
What makes you so special? That this might not be you in the statistics, right?
Yeah. I often say, now that I've had some time to reconcile some of those feelings, like the anger and the grief and the confusion and just the sadness. I feel you when you say that person that you were before cancer is gone.
Yeah. Even looking back in pictures.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I look like a different person.
Never the same.
No.
Yeah. But I also think that for me, cancer has been one of the greatest teachers in my life. And I'm wondering, you mentioned one of the greatest teachings that cancer gave me, you've already mentioned. We're very similar. I am very independent. I do things for myself. I don't need help. I'm good. I'm good. I'll help you, but you don't need to help me. And cancer taught me that we all need to allow others to help us, because there's actually a benefit to us. We need help.
It's part of your own healing.
It's
helping other people.
And yes, and also
allowing to be helped.
I totally didn't even think about what giving that gift to somebody else would mean. My sister-in-law, Christy, was my person and my husband. And by allowing them to help me, I saw that it made them feel so worthy and valuable. You know what I mean? And what a beautiful gift. And then I also learned that I don't have to do everything myself. So I'm curious, what did cancer teach you?
Well, at the other side of it is that, the being a survivor, and what does that mean? And, the way in which I see the world was a little bit different. But now what I'm finding is I'm a very resilient person, and I I kind of can give myself that pat on the back that, I did that and people watched me go through that with a lot of grace, actually. And, that if it was going to happen to them, then now they can see me on the other side of this, which is kind of the root of why I wanted to do something like this today, is that this will be the most difficult time of your life, more than likely. But you will be on the other side one day. And then, something like recently for me, I was out just walking my dog and my neighbor came to me and said, I know you went through something. I just got that news today. Can I talk to you about it? And that has happened numerous times since, you were one of them, right?
I was.
Where now I was on the other side of it. And I was, Aiden, as Aiden was for me, right? Now I was that person. And it was my job to show them that, it will be okay, that you will get there, and that these people, these healthcare professionals are going to help you. I know that that's not always the story, that some people, they do succumb to their illnesses, right? But I didn't. And so it is
and more and more women are surviving,
I agree.
And thriving for decades.
Yeah. Even women who have stage 4.
Yeah.
I'm surprised at how I feel so lucky that I had the technology, the medicines, even though they're, unpleasant at times, that if we had even been sick 20 years, prior, we might not have been able to leave our house. That there are these medicines that we can take to build us up even when we're being broken down, really. Things that I bet you women 20 years ago would have wanted. So the technology, the things, that are changing with, medical imaging and even the knowledge that, comes down the pipe. It's big. All of it's really big and purposeful.
And you being able to be a support for women, I should thank you because you were one of those people for me. Because you were so generous in sharing your story and being public about it. I felt really safe in asking you, oh my gosh, what the heck? And you were so gracious. And thank you. And I know there's other women out there that are listening to this that have probably also leaned on you for the same purposes.
Well, and it brings it to just a small little point that I want to say too, that I think people don't always talk about when they are talking about things like this, is that it is wonderful to support people, but it almost kind of you forget about it sometimes. And then when you start talking about it again, it can kind of bring it up for you again, and you start to like feel it. Like I think earlier on, I kind of almost got a bit teary there, you know, and it's been 7 years, right? Mm-hmm. But you still like, it can bring it to the surface and it can come out in strange ways. You know, like you can see people like with long blonde hair and suddenly go back to remembering, you know, when you had to shave it off like that, you know, and you'll just have like these moments of like, oh, I remember that.
That happened.
And then you can push it back down again or put it back on the shelf or whatever analogy you want to say. But yeah, it's like always there a little bit now.
Always there. What advice, Carly, would you give someone who is listening to this podcast right now and is maybe just beginning their journey with cancer?
Advice.
Yeah.
Stay busy for me. Other people might disagree though, you know, that, you know, some people say you really need to feel it. At the time, I really needed to not feel all the emotions.
All the feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed not feeling sorry for myself, even though people were like, you know, you're entitled to, you know, feel that way. Or like it was, I needed distraction. And to know that, you know, you aren't going to feel bad right away. So, like, it's not like you get your first treatment and suddenly you're like out for the count. Just stay busy, find things that you really love, even try new things, because it is a long period of time. Like your treatment everybody's treatment time is different. Like not everyone had 19 weeks of chemo, right? So find things just for you, try new things, have good supports. Sometimes it's better to not, have a support that knows like everything about you, like to be able to like cathartically expel all of your, I don't want to say the word crazy, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Wild thoughts, that you're having that, some are like reality-based thoughts, some are not reality-based thoughts, to a person that, isn't, your husband
like
or
a
your family member.
therapist or something.
Like find that person to just be like, because some of the things that like would come out in therapy for me, I would never say to some of my friends or family members, like some of the darker stuff or some of the, the thoughts I was having at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great advice. And I would probably say the same thing. There's a time to process all of those feelings, but when you're in it, it's really hard. I think staying busy. I also, my kids were younger, older than Vivian,
yes,
but being a mom and doing all the things and like actually made me feel like I kept teaching yoga.
Yeah.
Like through the entire thing.
I kept going to yoga.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I threw on my little beanie and I was attending your classes.
Yes.
And,
Yep.
I just had to.
Yeah. And it felt good to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It felt good to do that. And then there were times where you're trying to hold it together too for your family. And you're, telling my parents that sucked, right?
Yeah.
Like my husband, my kids. But, for me, it felt really good to just project kind of like this sense that everything was going to be okay. It was like I was convincing myself that it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
But there were times when I would literally go in my car because it was the only place that I felt like I could just let it all go. And I would just cry.
Sob.
Yeah. Because you could feel that it was just like, I just need to get this out. Right. And then I would go back in and everything's like, okay, I feel it's like just giving yourself permission to like have emotions and release emotions, but not have to process everything.
There's like all different kinds of crying. There's like the fear cry.
Yes.
There's
the anxiety
anger
cry.
Sob.
Yeah.
There's there's all different kinds of that.
We're now good experts on crying.
Yeah.
I want to really quickly ask you about what we were speaking about at the beginning, which is trusting your intuition.
Yeah. So that kind of links in with some of the sort of what I would deem it almost like a strange spiritual type thing that kind of happened to me around that time. So, after I had gone home and I wasn't getting the biopsy, I wanted to have those thoughts of, who wouldn't, right? Of it's all good, it's fine.
I'm going to be fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's way better to, think like that. But I was, again, breastfeeding Vivian, and I had what can only be described as like, a bit of a intuition or a voice or almost like this feeling where it said to me, you're dying, Like, and I was like, no, I'm not. And I was like talking to myself. No, I'm not. I was like, yeah, you are. How do you know? Unless you look under a microscope, you need to go back. And I was like, I need to go back. Like I was literally having a conversation with myself. And then I went back and it was big, And then, there were like dreams that I would have, that everything was going to be okay. Heaven-like dreams or like that, don't worry, if you die, there's something more. Yeah. I know, like weird dreams like that where I'd wake up and I would just feel so good. I'd be like, well, I guess if this doesn't go well, I'll be okay. And I had never really had like dreams like that, where I felt like it was a little bit beyond myself, but that might be hard for some certain people to comprehend.
Well, I can totally relate. I also had a bit of a sort of, I don't want to say it was like spiritual awakening. I just became more connected. Fortunately, having the yoga practice and that relationship with my body, I had become adept at listening, and so when I felt the chocolate chip, I sort of was like, oh, no, everything's good. But then I went back in, the doctor was like, oh, yeah, it's probably nothing. I was like, okay, it's probably nothing. But there was something in me was like, I don't know. So when I got that call that said it actually was, I was not surprised. But I think the message I would want to leave with people is like, listen to your body and advocate for yourself. Like, your doctors are doing the best they can with the information that they have.
I agree.
And they also base their advice on, the thousands of patients that they've seen over the years, right? But you are a person. And, I always say, like, the stats don't matter until you become the one.
Yeah, until you're the one.
Yeah. 1 in 8, right? Like, great if you're the 7, but, we were the 1. The 2.
That's right.
So, I think it's really important that we advocate for ourselves, men and women, regardless of whether it's an orange seed or a chocolate chip or a funny lump or pain or whatever. Like, listen to it. And it's your body's way of telling you something is not aligned.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is fun.
Do you have survivor guilt?
Yes, very much. Mm-hmm. I have lots of guilt. I've guilt that I even am sitting here sharing part of my story with you because I go, wow, hers was so much worse than mine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like I've downplayed what I've gone through before.
Yes.
Because like it could always be worse. Yeah, like some of the people that I was having chemo with, they're gone.
Yeah.
Like they weren't as lucky, and but I feel really lucky.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to have you here today, because I think that part of what makes that whole thing feel okay for me is to be able to have these very honest conversations about that breast cancer actually does affect younger women than you think.
Knowledge is power.
Yes. And this is what the journey looks like. And you will be okay. Like, for the most part, I don't know what the stat is now, like 90%. Like, you're
early detection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get a mammogram. Like, if you're, what is it? I think it's over 40. You don't have to have a reason or a referral. You can just call the clinic.
Don't be scared of that technology, right? Like, the mammograms are, personally, I didn't find them to be all that, invasive.
Oh, they're uncomfortable, but sure, listen, if it saves your life, and this
apps are uncomfortable,
totally. And this technology is available, so I want to leave it there with a very empowering message to women that no one is going to do this for you. You have to advocate. You have to advocate for yourself. Okay,
and talk. I think women should talk.
And
talk about it as much as they can.
Yes. As much as you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
Totally.
Normalize the potential for illness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's life after breast cancer.
Yes, there is.
Lots of it.
As it turns out.
And here we are.
Yeah.
I'm going to just close with a couple of questions. And my other Carly is giving me the eye, like, wrap it up, Nairos.
Okay.
But I think these are valuable questions.
Okay.
What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is knowing that if, youth like Vivian, so my daughter, and other, youth like your daughter are going to have even more opportunities than we had. If it comes down to it for them, that the outcomes might even be better. that we might catch things and not even need chemo, or we might not even need, like it's all in that discovery, that evolution of care, right?
We were talking about AI before we started recording.
Yeah.
Maybe the robots will figure it out for us. Let's hope. And I'm curious, when we talk about wealthy, our podcast, this whole idea around being wealthy, and that health is multifaceted and nuanced, and it's our physical health, it's our emotional health, it's our mental health, it's our spiritual health, it's our relationship health. I'm curious, what areas of your health do you feel wealthy?
Well, I think one of the things that changed for me with this whole journey is that I am now acutely aware of time. And so I feel wealthy in the fact that I have more time, and I value my time, and I, want to spend it wisely, and I don't take it for granted. And health is part of that.
I love that. To be continued. There are so many things that we could continue to talk about on this subject, but I also am really looking forward to chatting more with you about your work in our community as a clinician and as a person who's extremely passionate about the mental health of our young people. You are...
I am passionate about it.
Yes, I know. And you are such a gift to our health system and to our community. I really appreciate your friendship and your generosity. So thank you, Carly. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.